Max had always been a lively, curious dog. He was a mixed breed with golden fur and eyes that sparkled with the energy of a pup, even though he was already a few years old. His owners loved him dearly, and he was known for his playful antics and affectionate nature. But everything changed when Max's eyesight started to deteriorate. At first, it was subtle. Max would bump into things more than usual, or miss a toy when it was tossed his way. But as time went on, the signs became more alarming. His once bright eyes, full of life, began to fade. The vet confirmed what Max's owners had feared. He was slowly going blind due to a condition that had no cure. It wasn't long before he could barely see anything at all. His family tried to help him adjust. They rearranged the furniture in their home so Max wouldn't bump into it, and they began teaching him to navigate by scent and sound. But despite their best efforts, Max struggled. The world, once so familiar and full of excitement, now seemed like a cold, foreign place. Max would wander around the house, bumping into walls and stumbling over his toys. He could hear people's voices, but the joy of seeing their faces, the wag of his tail when they came home, those things began to fade. Max's depression started to grow. He spent more and more time lying in his bed, his tail tucked tightly between his legs. His family, heartbroken, did everything they could to comfort him, but nothing seemed to reach him anymore. He had become a shadow of the dog he once was, and no matter how hard they tried, his owners couldn't bring the spark back into his life. After a few months of struggling, they made the heart-wrenching decision to bring Max to the shelter. They couldn't bear to see him so lost and miserable, and they hoped that a fresh start might help him find his way again. The shelter was a busy place, filled with the sounds of barking dogs, the rustle of animal food being poured into bowls, and the occasional meow from the cat section. It wasn't a bad place, but it was crowded. There were many dogs and cats, all with their own stories of abandonment, injury, or misfortune. Max had never been good with large crowds. He was used to his quiet home, where he could be close to the people he loved. But now, in a new, unfamiliar place, he felt even more isolated. At first, Max didn't even want to leave his cage. He stayed curled up in the corner, his head resting on his paws, his body tense. He didn't trust anyone or anything anymore. The shelter workers tried to coax him out, but he wasn't interested in playing or even being petted. He didn't see the point. What was the use of a world that didn't make sense anymore? What was the point of trying when everything felt so empty? Every day, Max would hear the footsteps of people coming and going, pausing at his cage, looking at him with pity, and then walking away. No one wanted to adopt a blind dog. They saw him as too much work, too much of a challenge. And so, Max sat alone, day after day, growing more despondent. One day, as Max lay in his cage, his head resting on his paws, he heard a soft sound, a rustling, followed by a tiny, almost imperceptible meow. His ears perked up, and he lifted his head slowly. It wasn't a dog's bark, nor the usual noise of the shelter, but something different. He could smell the faint scent of something familiar, something small and soft, and for a brief moment, Max wondered what it was. It was coming from the other side of the shelter, in the direction of the cat section. Max's world had shrunk to the sound of voices, footsteps, and the occasional clink of food bowls. But now, for the first time in weeks, his curiosity was piqued. He turned his head in the direction of the sound and listened carefully. The meow came again, clearer this time. Max didn't understand why, but he felt an odd sense of calm wash over him. There was something about the sound that seemed comforting. It wasn't the loud, chaotic barks of other dogs, but something softer, quieter, like it was meant just for him. He wanted to get up and investigate, but his legs felt heavy, and he was afraid to move too suddenly. Instead, he stayed in his corner, listening. The shelter workers had seen Max's behavior, and one of them, a kind woman named Sarah, noticed the shift in him. She had been volunteering at the shelter for years, and she had seen many animals come and go. But something about Max stood out to her. It wasn't just his blindness, though that certainly made him unique, it was the way he carried himself. There was a deep sadness in him, a kind of hopelessness, that Sarah couldn't ignore. She knew that he needed something, but she wasn't sure what. Sarah walked over to Max's cage, and as she knelt down to get a better look at him, she caught sight of the small cat in the nearby enclosure. The cat had been new to the shelter, just brought in that morning after being rescued from a tough situation. She was small, with a ginger coat that shone in the dim light of the shelter. Her eyes were bright and alert, and although she was still nervous, she seemed curious about everything around her. As Sarah stood up, she glanced back at Max, then at the cat. There was a thought that had crossed her mind earlier, but she had dismissed it as unlikely. But now, watching the two animals from a distance, something inside her clicked. What if? Sarah murmured to herself. The idea was a little strange, but she couldn't ignore the possibility. She decided to give it a try. Later that day, as the shelter settled into a quieter rhythm, Sarah opened the cage of the small cat. She watched as the ginger tabby hesitated for a moment, sniffing the air, then darted out of her cage and padded softly across the floor. She was cautious, but there was a spark in her eyes, a willingness to explore, to make new connections. Max was still in his corner, lying in the same position as before. He didn't hear the soft padding of paws at first, and even when he did, he didn't react. He was used to the sounds of the shelter, but the sound of a cat, especially one so small, was something new. As the cat drew closer to Max's cage, Sarah watched carefully. She had a feeling that this might just work. There was something about the cat's gentle, inquisitive nature that felt like it might be the answer Max needed. As Lily, the cat, came closer, she stopped just short of Max's cage. For a moment, there was only silence between them. Then, something surprising happened. Max, who had always been reluctant to interact with anyone, especially other animals, slowly lifted his head and turned in the direction of the cat. He could sense her presence now. His nose twitched as he tried to take in the unfamiliar scent. There was a pause, an almost magical moment of recognition. Lily, in turn, looked at Max. She didn't shy away or run like most of the other animals did. Instead, she took a few cautious steps closer, then sat down in front of his cage. Her green eyes fixed on Max, as if studying him. For the first time in what felt like forever, Max felt something stir inside him. He wasn't sure what it was. Maybe it was the sense of another living being who didn't seem scared of him. Maybe it was the quiet reassurance in Lily's gaze. But whatever it was, it made him feel less alone. The days that followed Lily's first approach to Max brought more surprises than anyone could have anticipated. The bond forming between the blind dog and the curious cat began to capture the attention of everyone at the shelter. It started subtly at first. Lily, the ginger tabby, would sit beside Max's cage each morning, her tail curling in slow, deliberate movements. Max, drawn to her soothing presence, would lift his head and listen, his once lifeless posture now showing faint signs of hope. Sarah, the shelter worker, watched with cautious optimism. She had always believed that animals had the ability to connect in ways humans didn't fully understand, but this was unlike anything she'd seen before. She decided to let the two interact more freely. With care, Sarah opened Max's cage and allowed Lily to step inside. What followed was nothing short of extraordinary. Lily didn't hesitate. She walked directly to Max and gently brushed her side against his. Max flinched at first, unsure of what was happening, but Lily's calm, deliberate actions reassured him. She rubbed her head against his shoulder, purring softly, and Max let out a low whimper, one that didn't sound like fear or sadness but something closer to relief. For the first time in weeks, Max stood up. The change was slow but unmistakable. Lily took it upon herself to guide Max, much to the amazement of the shelter staff. She would lead him with soft meows, tapping her paw against the ground to create subtle cues for him to follow. Max, relying on his heightened sense of hearing and smell, began to respond. Together, they navigated the small enclosure of his cage. By the end of the week, Max was following Lily with cautious but growing confidence. The story of the blind dog and his feline guide quickly became the talk of the shelter. Visitors would stop by just to see the pair in action. Adoption inquiries for Max started trickling in, but the shelter staff soon realized something crucial. Max and Lily couldn't be separated. Their bond wasn't just endearing, it was vital. Lily had become Max's eyes, his comfort, and his reason to trust again. One crisp autumn morning, Sarah greeted Max and Lily with a special surprise, a trip to the shelter's enclosed outdoor space. It was a place designed to give the animals a sense of freedom while keeping them safe. For Max, who hadn't ventured beyond his cage in weeks, the idea was both thrilling and terrifying. He sniffed the air cautiously, the unfamiliar scents making him tense. But Lily was by his side, her calm presence guiding him forward. The two stepped into the yard together. At first, Max hesitated, his paws planted firmly on the soft grass. Lily walked ahead, her tail swishing in encouragement. She stopped a few steps away and let out a soft trill, a sound Max had come to associate with safety. Slowly, he followed. Step by step, Max explored the yard, his confidence growing with each move. Lily led him to a sunny spot where he lay down, basking in the warmth. For the first time, he looked peaceful. Days turned into weeks, and the transformation in Max was nothing short of miraculous. His once drooping ears now perked up at the sound of Lily's voice. His tail, which had been motionless for so long, wagged eagerly whenever she approached. Lily, for her part, seemed to thrive in her role as Max's guide. She would nudge him toward his food bowl, lead him around obstacles, and even cuddle up beside him during nap times. They were inseparable. Their bond became a beacon of hope for the shelter. Sarah began sharing their story on social media, and soon Max and Lily's tale of friendship went viral. People from all over the country were moved by the unlikely pair. Donations poured into the shelter, allowing them to improve their facilities and care for other animals in need. But perhaps the most heartwarming outcome was the surge in adoptions inspired by Max and Lily. Families who had once overlooked older or disabled animals began to see them in a new light. As winter approached, Max and Lily's story took another turn. A family who had been following their journey reached out to the shelter. The Martins, a kind and compassionate couple with 2 young children, wanted to adopt Max and Lily together. They lived on a spacious farm with plenty of room for the pair to roam and a quiet, loving environment that seemed perfect for their needs. The day Max and Lily left the shelter was bittersweet. Sarah, who had grown attached to them, fought back tears as she helped load them into the Martins' car. She knew they were going to a wonderful home, but saying goodbye was never easy. As the car drove away, Max rested his head against Lily, her soft purring a reminder that they were embarking on this new chapter together. At the Martins' farm, Max and Lily adapted quickly. The wide-open spaces were a challenge for Max at first, but Lily was there every step of the way, guiding him around the property. She created a system of signals, using her voice, her tail, and gentle nudges to help Max navigate his new surroundings. The Martins' children adored them, and the pair became the heart of the family. The seasons passed, and Max and Lily's bond only deepened. They became a symbol of resilience and friendship, not just for the Martins but for everyone who heard their story. Their journey was a reminder that love and connection could transcend even the most daunting challenges. And so, the blind dog who had once given up on life and the cat who refused to give up on him continued to inspire everyone they met. Together, they proved that sometimes, the most extraordinary friendships come from the most unexpected places.